Live from Vancouver at the 111th Grey Cup. It's CFL 110 with Hustler and Jeff Hamilton, presented by Garage Living Winnipeg. Here's your host, Andrew Hustler Paterson.
What an incredible intro. What an intro as we are live at Grey Cup on Radio Row for another edition of CFL 110. Andrew Paterson, Jeff Hamilton with you, getting ready for the big game on Sunday, both with lots from Hammer coming up from around the league as we lead into the 111th Grey Cup. Of course, it's been such a fun year on CFL 110. We appreciate everyone that's jumped on and joined the program with us and helped us spread the word of great three-down talk every week here on the Winnipeg Sports Talk channel. And a huge thanks to our friends at Garage Living Winnipeg for their support of the inaugural season of CFL 110. And the push is on, folks. If you want to have a clean, organized garage as we head into the snowy season, give Garage Living and our good friend Pat Kanuga a call at 204-999-1234. Wouldn't it be great to have a place for all the kids' bikes, hockey, and football equipment? And yes, the snow shovels, instead of being scattered all over the garage? Well, Garage Living has an innovative solution called Slatwall. Dozens of hooks, baskets, and shelves that clip into it to get everything off your floor. There's even heavy-duty tire tracks to store those summer and winter tires. And the cool thing is you can do as much or as little of it as you want to fit within your budget. Don't miss your chance to clear the clutter, organize and beautify your garage with Slatwall. Garage Living also offers polyaspartic floor coating, made in Canada premium metal cabinetry for a total garage makeover. Check out their amazing work they've done for so many of their clients at their website at garageliving.com, or give Pat Kanuga a call, 204-999-1234, to book a free in-garage consultation or make an appointment to meet him in their showroom at 981 Main Street. Garage Living Winnipeg, garages made for living. Let's do this. Here at Radio Row and live with the Hammer for the first time. We're always doing these things on Zoom. I like it so much better when we're in the same place, and we are here, and this is the epicenter of the three-down game this week. Great start to the week here in Van.
Where do I put my hands?
Hey, you can flail them wherever you want. Let her roll, let her rip.
Feels like that's been kind of the theme of Grey Cup Week, no rules. So, and I feel like we've been following that.
Great start last night. Listen, I kind of mentioned this on our program on Tuesday coming out of the weekend. But just before we go any further, it was a great gathering of the media last night. The whole gang of the Football Reporters of Canada, the TSN crew, people from around the country. Farhan and Dave were doing the hosting of the festivities. Special moment, though, when we recognized the memory of Ted with not a moment of silence. He would not wanted that. Everyone raising their glasses and remembering Ted, who is so missed this week, especially at Grey Cup.
It's so funny. I'm so glad they did it the way they did it and didn't, not that I was expecting a, moment of silence or anything like that, because he wouldn't want that, right? He would want to be,
the right choice
I've heard the name of, life of the party, and I don't even know if that's necessarily accurate in the sense that, he wasn't, a guy who was the loudest or dominated every conversation. He was just a guy who was everywhere.
He wasn't leaving.
He was everywhere. Like he was, and obviously I miss him just in general, but especially this week, because it was just like when you were bored or when you were done work, my first text message would be right to Ted, and it'd be like, "I'm already in the hospitality suite, man. I'll see you there." And
Get over here.
Obviously it's a tough week, but in a lot of ways it's a great week. We're with a lot of our CFL family, a lot of reporters from across the country, people who knew and loved Ted, and a lot of people who Ted loved back. So I'm really happy this week has been, part of it at least has been dedicated to his memory, and I'm sure we'll see a few more kind of gestures aimed towards his legacy.
No doubt about that. Listen, we're going to get to the game. Obviously, the Argos and the Bombers were the reason why everyone is here in a little bit. But let's start it off with, the state of the league. Always a huge part of the week of the Grey Cup, and a little bit different this year because of the news that we'd learned leading into this week that Randy Ambrosie was stepping down as the CFL commissioner. But before we even get to the job and who might fill it, Highlights, lowlights. So, what did you make of the state of the commissioner's address earlier this week, Hammer?
Randy took full advantage of his departing address, and that he did what he used to do at the beginning when he first got the job in 2017. He tried to do those stalling tactics. So a surprise guest, he says, Kate Burness shows up. It was almost like they were missing the music and the smoke machine, but she came out and did a quick Q&A, and we're all kind of looking around at each other. Is Randy going to give us time, right? Because we only have a certain allotted time, and it's traditionally done where it's traditionally done where he just says something kind of brief and then opens it to questions. But that being said, I think every question needed to be or was asked, and it was just a little bit different, right? Because usually it is all focused on what are the issues with the league, what needs to be fixed, how is he addressing it. But as the outgoing commissioner now, it was kind of turned into that, of course, but it was more so his legacy, as well as what does the next commissioner need to do. So the highlights, a few different things. There was some buzz around that me and Randy got into it or whatever. First of all, me and that
was fake news from Doug jumping on Winnipeg Sports Talk when you were on with us earlier this week.
Exactly. So I think that's a little bit overplayed a bit. I have a good relationship with Randy, but I've been waiting to ask him about the Chad Kelly situation, and it wasn't something that I was thinking about for months. I just wanted to know if he understood the policy in which he used with Chad Kelly. And I'm going to make this quick. I don't want to spend too much on that, but Chad Kelly got the benefit of what the policy is all about. He got the rehabilitative approach. And so when I asked Randy about it and how it differed from other cases in the past, and he just kind of gave me a word salad. My assumptions were essentially proven that he has no idea about it. So moving on from that, there was a lot of talk about expansion, right? Because Randy talked a big game about having a 10th team, and a lot of the focus was on Atlantic Canada, and he was he would
finally we're hearing Quebec City being named,
Quebec
right?
City, yeah, and on all these different things, a lot some attention there as well. And so that never came to fruition, right? Even though those touchdown Atlantic games were successful, and he would say stuff like, we've never been closer, and so that kind of fell on its face. He had to address the fact that when he first took over the job, he said he would double league revenues. He didn't do that, so and he admitted to that, credit for that. And then talking about U.S. expansion, because I'll be honest with you, I've been hearing lots and lots about the potential of expansion to the U.S., especially with the United Football League, potentially and probably likely shutting down. Now, what I've been hearing is it wouldn't be one league, it'd be two separate leagues, and that they would do inter-squad games. I don't know, a lot of this is speculation at this point, just kind of rumors
just
or whatever.
Quickly, this is the UFL, what used to be the XFL, and then the XFL relaunched as the UFL, or is that actually? I have a hard time keeping track of all these.
To be honest with you, I was about to speak super confidently about that, but I don't even know, man. I don't even really pay attention to these spring leagues. They pop up for a year or two, and then they're gone. So yeah, I know there's been interest in the past, but anyways, Randy, he addressed that, and he did say, he poured cold water on it in the sense he talked about how important it was to be a Canadian game and our country's rules and how unique the game is, and you wouldn't want to compromise that. Well, he didn't really address what I just said, right? The potential of two separate leagues. So that was talked about. Some other stuff, obviously, being the various markets. He was pumping some of the good things he did, and there were some positives. Obviously, the ownership group is better than it's ever been,
for sure.
You look at particularly the last three owners, including the organization here that's putting on such a great Cup week, and Amar Doman, and then you look at Pierre-Karl Palado in Montreal and how deep his pockets are, and what that might lead to with obviously him having a TV company, and so. Then there's Larry Thompson in Edmonton. So there was some positives for sure. And I'll end it with this. I think Randy, I think the issue for him was that he was constantly over-promising and under-delivering. And when I mentioned that to him, I said that would be the knock against you. What advice would you have for the next person to come on? And he said have an open mind and surround yourself with good people. So I don't know if that's something he took to mind, but we'll see. I think it's I think we'll look back on his tenure 10 years from now in a lot more favorable view. He did go 7 years. That's a long time, especially for a league that had been turning over its commissioners. And he.
I'll say this: we've got a league and we've got a Grey Cup, and I wasn't sure that was going to be the case when we got through the pandemic.
And that's what I was just going to mention. It's like, he didn't ask for a pandemic, and he had some missteps, particularly when he was in front of the standing committee and got his lunch fed to him. But you can't question his passion. We'll see who the next guy is. He's got to he's got to come in and build on what Randy's started essentially, and I think the focus will be on generating new forms of revenue. Like, when is that not the case, right?
Well, I mean, listen, we've also talked for so long about a 10th team, and I think the CFL is exhausted and done everything they can to try to get some traction in Atlantic Canada. For me, and I'm surprised that this wasn't happening at the same time, but I was happy to hear that Quebec City is being discussed for a team. This is an area in Quebec I think people need to know. I mean, this goes back about 20 years. But the growth of football in Quebec, I mean, just look at the Laval program, the Montreal program. I mean, it is flourishing. The Alouettes have done quite well. And listen, it was noble. It would have been great if an Atlantic team could have worked, and that truly would have been a coast-to-coast team. But if that's not going to be the case, I think they'd be very smart to start, really thoroughly exploring and trying to see whether a second team in Quebec to join the Eastern Conference to round it out to 10, because I think it would work. I think that is a market and a province that really does support football. And, Quebec City, since the Nordiques left, and obviously it doesn't look like they're getting a National Hockey League team anytime soon, despite building that rink, I think would be a really unique city and culture to be a part of the CFL. And certainly we've heard some complaints, notably from the Alouettes last year on the ignoring of French. I mean, that would be another great way to give a huge populace of the country a little bit more in the game. So I personally am optimistic or hopeful that can really be dove into, because I think there's money there, and I think that it actually could work a lot more realistically than the Atlantic plans.
Yeah, I think it's a fair comment. I think what's not really talked about with the Atlantic, option is the travel. It's far away, man. That's a long travel. Like, anybody who's, like the idea of going to St. John's, Newfoundland. People, I wouldn't say everybody, but most people who don't go to the East don't realize, how far Halifax is from St. John's, let alone, all the other football cities. Whether it can be done with, those pop-up stadiums we've been hearing lots about. I mentioned Pierre-Carl Palado with the Montreal Alouettes. Maybe, he's got deep enough pockets for another team. There's rumors about, maybe, his company taking, maybe getting the rights at the end of 26 when TSN's done. I would also add this part: not a lot of good feelings between him and the National Hockey League. And so this, I think, is his way of proving that he's a good owner. And so I think it's a little bit of a test for him, that if he can, be a positive influence on his CFL team and maybe potentially teams, that might open the door, to maybe a better way of getting a team in Quebec City.
I'm certainly in for a 10th team. I'd like it to be in Canada before we start talking about going south of the border.
Fair enough.
That's a conversation for another time. Obviously, the other big question, with Randy Ambrosie leaving the commissioner job at some point in the future, who's next, Jeff? Have any candidates already kind of come forward, or is this more kind of speculation of guys that might be a good fit for the job?
The only real name that I've kind of heard being tossed around is really Mike Morreale. And I don't even know if that's necessarily if he's interested. I don't know why he wouldn't be interested. He's currently the commissioner of the Canadian Elite Basketball League, and so I'd imagine the CFL, obviously a league he played in, would be a step up. As far as a promotion goes, he's a friendly face. If anyone who's ever talked to Mike Morreale knows just how approachable he is. That's one of them. I think it really comes down to, as I mentioned before, you need to have a savvy mind come in and come up with ways to create and generate new revenue streams. And we've seen that with Mike Morreale in the Canadian Elite Basketball League, and I wonder if that might be something of interest. I would say, while I don't have a lot of names, what I would, if that new or potentially future commissioner is listening to this show right now, I would say there's some things you could definitely learn from Randy Ambrosie. And one of the first things I would say is, you need to find some common ground with the Players Association, because throughout his tenure, Randy talked over and over and over again about the importance of players, importance of the talent, and I think he actually I think he actually meant it in the first year or so. That relationship went really south, all the way up until this point, and so I think you need to get them on, and the league needs to understand that all the stakeholders need to be part of this. The players need to be part of this, and so if that would be probably my greatest advice to the next incoming commissioner. But as far as names go, I mean, I think I think those will probably trickle out here, throughout Grey Cup week. But at this point, I think it's just trying to figure out who might want the job.
That'll be something that we'll follow on Winnipeg Sports Talk visits, and of course with your work in the Winnipeg Free Press throughout the off season. We're not even technically into the off season, but this is a week where there's plenty of interesting CFL gossip in and around. What are we hearing about the Elks general manager's job, and does that tie into some potential hurt feelings within a certain office in Bomberland?
Yeah, so some of the buzz, some of the gossip, some of the scuttlebutt out there, and as you mentioned, Huss, the Elks had made a deadline, essentially, a couple weeks ago, that they wanted to get this done, preferably during Grey Cup week, but close to right after, right? You're not supposed to announce big news during Grey Cup week. It's kind of one of those blackout things. If you're going to do something special, wait until after. And so the buzz is that they are going to make their decision on Monday. Now, if you can just deduce this from history, assistant general manager Ted Gavea applied for that job when it was up, when it was open, years back with Chris Jones, and was reportedly the runner-up, the first runner-up for it. He would not have been able to interview for that job if he was interested going at it again, because while there are league rules that help people get to that promotion and jobs, we'll talk about that in a second, there's still a rule that you cannot talk to other teams until your team's eliminated. So, whether, I'm not trying to get into the Bombers, dirty laundry or behind the scenes stuff, but I could imagine there's some notable frustration with that. As you'll know, Bombers aren't strangers to this stuff. It was Paul LaPolice who got denied the opportunity to talk to the Saskatchewan Roughriders when Craig Dickinson ultimately got the job. And I'll tell you this, Lapo was not happy, and so it essentially created the Lapo rule, where now if this situation if you want to get, before, your president could tell you no way, right? No chance, you can't leave, you're our guy, you're under our contract, you have to live that. But now the rule is, if you get the opportunity to interview for a job that's vertical, so a promotion, that they can't turn you down. This is the small loophole, Huss, where it's like where the rubber meets the road on it, and it's like, well, why can't he do it? Why can't he, because their roles aren't really active this week. This is almost kind of a week where you put your feet up and you hope that all your hard work in the season. So that being said, the Bombers like these guys. They've been a big part of their success, and they don't want to lose them. And so so you can kind of see it from both sides. But yeah, that's kind of, I'm sure Ted would probably want a little bit of a better deal on that one.
Yeah.
And maybe we see a rule change soon.
And you know what? Listen, again, I don't know the inner workings behind the scenes, but much like the Lapo situation, it can, turn someone into a disgruntled employee quite quickly if, there's not a path for them to have that opportunity within the organization. And because of how well they've done their job and the success of their operation, they can't get in the mix for another one. Needless to say, we'll be all over the BC situation next week. Let's talk about quarterbacks. Tomorrow on Winnipeg Sports Talk, I'm actually going to have Trey Ford on. It'd be interesting to talk to him about his opportunities this offseason, sort of what he's looking for.
Yeah.
A team a lot of people thought was going to be here in Vancouver isn't, and that's the Montreal Alouettes.
Yeah.
And, Hammer, as we did this show throughout the year, at first there was like, who is that guy, Davis Alexander, that came in that game? And then, holy smokes, he balled out again. To the point at the end of the year where there were a number of people that I respect in the CFL make the case that Davis Alexander gives them the best chance to win. they've got some big decisions to be to make. Cody Fajardo was their Grey Cup hero yesterday. Nothing can be taken away, but we're moving on, another season removed from that. What's the latest, and what are you hearing about the Montreal quarterback situation?
Montreal has a fascinating situation in front of them. I just don't see, I believe they don't see a way of retaining both of them next season. I talked to Jason Moss about this in the final regular season game that the Bombers clinched the West at. He talked about it being very difficult, that Davis Alexander had earned this opportunity to get paid a sizable amount of money to be, to get that commitment from a team. But it's kind of careful what you wish for right now. That's the vibe that's coming out of it. And, it's interesting that you mentioned Trey Ford, because we've talked about this on the show. Trey Ford, with the knock against him and why GMs have had a hard time committing to him and making him their number one, as we've seen, is because that confidence in the huddle isn't where it needs to be. And, to go over that again, you look at the Bo Levi Mitchells, the Zach Colarises, the Trevor Harrises, the guys that have been in this league for a long time. They go into the huddle. They bring a ton of energy in it. They're calling the play. They're looking at guys in the huddle. Like if the first read is going to your number one target, you're calling the play, and you're almost giving the guy an eye look. And that's kind of the football language that a lot of people don't understand. Well, Trey Ford doesn't do that. He's still learning how to be. He's thinking of too much. He's still learning how to do CFL defenses. So he gets in the huddle, doesn't say too much, breaks the huddle, and then isn't talking to his teammates. And so that is, from what I understand, is a similar situation with Davis Alexander. And factor in Huss, and how many times have we seen this? He only has an X amount of tape. Well, now that they can study for him and get ready for him, that's when you inevitably see a quarterback kind of come back to earth. And so I think they're weighing that option. I think management is truly weighing that option, because Cody can't, not as young, obviously not as mobile, arm strength isn't there, but is an incredible leader and is an experienced guy and can do everything I just said, and that brings you comfort. That brings you a comfort, especially when you have the offensive line that they have, the receivers that they have, and notably the defense that they have. So I think it's a little bit harder of a decision than it may have appeared. Now this is my gut feeling. I think Danny Machocha wants to sign Davis Alexander, and I would go as far as to say I bet you a deal has already been done and the contract put into the drawer. And that's just my gut feeling. But that's we'll see. We'll see how that works.
Is Cody free agent?
He would be a free agent.
Okay, so then we'll see where Cody ends up. I'm really interested.
Actually, I think he might have 1 year, but that's still he'll be released or traded.
Yeah.
He might be up. I got to I should know that.
There might be a cost on that, but I mean, we're not talking about $500,000 guaranteed.
No. Well, no, and if you're making your decision where you're paying Davis Alexander, the writing's on the wall. It's pretty much a Vernon Adams situation. Vernon Adams has a contract, but he's not coming back, right?
Yeah, and VA he was at the party last night. Yeah. Great hair and great energy. I will say that. Just being
great guy,
around
man.
him,
Great guy.
Well, he certainly seemed that. I'd never kind of been in the same place with him outside of a football stadium, but just him and the civvies. He brought great energy there. He's an incredible player. I still think that the Elks are the place that VA goes to. But, man, it was interesting hearing a lot of people thinking that Calgary is the next spot for VA. And on top of that, speculation that Jake Mayer is going to end up in Saskatchewan. Some interesting quarterback scuttlebutt coming out of last night.
Well, and Harris too, right? Like, I distinctly remember listening to the post-game show at CJME with Jamie Nye, and it being like, and this was after the Labor Day Classic, and then again after the Banjo Bowl. It wasn't just the fans that were calling for Shea Paterson to become the quarterback. It was just kind of understood, at least to the people, speaking common sense, that the best quarterback for the Riders this season was Trevor Harris, but he wasn't going to be the long-term option. If you look at Trevor Harris's comments at the end of the year, it was it was pretty interesting to hear what he had to say, particularly like he wasn't going to step in the way of the Rough Riders if they wanted to do something different because he had too much respect for them. So I thought that was interesting. I think that Trevor Harris, because of the injury the year before, they did him a massive solid by allowing him to come back. So I think Trevor Harris, acutely understands what they've done for him. I just don't know, much like in Hamilton Huss, if you can go back to a guy who's, that old. He's 38 years old, man. So he'll be 39 years old next year. And, I'm not trying to be an ageist here. And I know that he does all his training. He's got like the Tom Brady situation. But
TB12.
But, I think it's such a gamble with just the potential of injuries. But yeah, I think the whole quarterback situation, if you compare it to what it was like week one to where it is now, and some of those names like the Mitchell and Harris rising up and some of them kind of falling flat, obviously the Jake Mayers of the world, and VA now needing a new home, it is interesting to see just how crazy the landscape could be by next season.
Well, there are lots of league gossip. I'm sure we'll have a little bit more tomorrow on the program as we get closer to the big game. Tonight is the awards, and I brought this up today on Winnipeg Sports Talk, Jeff, but I'll get your take on this. Focusing in on the MOP award. Brady Olivera was runner-up last year.
Yeah.
He has been in the league, this is his 5th year. Grey Cups in the first 2, albeit injured, and a backup.
Yeah.
Star running back for the Western champions in the last 2, falling just short in the Grey Cup. And again, being the runner-up last year for the MOP. This year, he is likely tonight to win the most outstanding Canadian and the most outstanding player, which would make him only the 4th Canadian player in CFL history to win most outstanding player. Russ Jackson, who did it 3 times, Tony Gabriel, and John Cornish, all in the Hall of Fame. If he could pull that off and get a ring as a starter to kind of help fortify a Bomber dynasty, if you will, what does that do to Brady's place in Blue Bomber history, but also CFL history? Because I kind of think, and this was my point in bringing it up earlier today, having Andrew Harris here, coming back from BC, being the Winnipeg guy, and having Brady follow in his footsteps, I'm not sure people really talk enough about just still how incredibly unique it is for a hometown guy in the hometown to be doing what he has done at this high level, which, as I mentioned, he could be only the 4th in the history of the league to make happen tonight. Never mind the ring on Sunday.
Well, I can tell you this: if you were to follow me around yesterday, when I went to various people, not just to his Blue Bomber teammates, but to some members of the Toronto Argonauts, Bo Levi Mitchell, I spoke to a couple other guys, some of the guys up for awards, to talk about Brady. Man, some of the stuff that they talk about is just incredible. It's his ability. The biggest takeaway I'd say of all the compliments that he receives is his durability and availability. The fact that he plays the style in which he plays and is able to play 17, 18 games a year is incredible, right? And it's a testament to how he treats his body, how he treats his mind. I mean, this guy is a clean living, good dude, right? And he's so passionate about the game. He's so passionate about Winnipeg. He's so passionate about bringing success to Winnipeg, and it's killing him that he hasn't won that Grey Cup as the number 1 back since replacing Andrew Harris. So that, as much as it would be great for him to win the most outstanding player award, and I'm with you, man, I think that would cement him at this point in stage as a guy who will be remembered for a long time, just as you mentioned. Canadians don't often get up for that award, and you could argue he got robbed from it last year. I will say this too: I think at the end of it, when all is said and done about Brady Olivera, if he can stay healthy, I think he will absolutely crush records. I think Andrew Harris did a lot of great things in this city. He brought those championships home. He brought that respectability back to this city. But I think that Brady Olivera is just going to follow in those footsteps. And credit to Andrew too, because he's played a sizable role in Brady's maturity and evolution in this league. But just the person who Brady is, and I'm not saying Andrew's not a bad person, but I don't see Brady at the end of his career, maybe doing some of the things that Andrew did before he got to training camp. So a guy who's 27 years old, he's still got plenty of years left in this league, and I think when all is said and done, we're gonna be seeing a Brady Olivera, not just a surefire Hall of Famer, but somebody who is going to make a real lasting mark on this league for a very long time.
Telling you right now, they win this football game on Sunday, and he pulls the double tonight, I think he could walk away from football in the off season and be a CFL Hall of Famer. I think
you could make that argument
for sure. I mean,
it would be a bit tough.
The good thing is, hopefully, we don't even have to go down that road, and there'll be a long run for him going forward. But careers in football often are short. Harris did sort of play forever. You've got a couple guys that had legendary careers that went long, but this era that Brady Olivera has joined the Blue Bombers and been at the top of the league is something incredibly special. And between tonight and hopefully Sunday could be a true ascension to a place that he has been working on and I think really deserves to be in. Mm-hmm. And that is a rarefied air of Canadian football history.
Absolutely.
Let's get to the game. And we can hit both of the teams, but you've just been around. Before we kind of talk about path to victory and keys for both teams, you've been around both. How would you just describe the atmosphere around the Argos compared to the Bombers? From what I gathered from a number of people I talked to, the Bombers seem to be incredibly focused and businesslike, and the Argos are pretty pumped to be there, but I'm not sure that entire squad was planning on a full week in Vancouver before they went in that game last week.
Yeah, I wrote about it earlier. If you haven't checked out the story, go check that one out. And the rest of my coverage, doing stories all day, all week, obviously on winnipegfreepress.com. I wrote about how it was back to kind of feeling like the 2019 Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a team that showed up in showed up in Calgary against Hamilton as the severe underdog, didn't have much to say. And I remember, midway through that week being like, I think the Bombers are going to win. The Ticats were the best team by far, almost seemingly by a mile that year. And I'm like, I think the Bombers are going to win. They're dialed in. There's just this aura about them, very much similar to this season. And I think part of it is, obviously, it took a lot more to get here. The Bombers had to go all the way down to the final second to clinch the West. Whereas, in previous years, we saw this team clinch it a month before the season was over. Got to use that, the final few weeks to do whatever they wanted with it. So I think there's a little bit of humbledness to it. And I also think if you look at the approach the last couple seasons, and I'm going to focus on last season because it's the one I remember the most, you had, Kenny Lawler with the flashy sunglasses, doing his interviews inside with glasses on. You had Willie Jefferson with a camera, like as if he was doing a whole documentary on the whole week. And I'm not saying that stuff wasn't fun and engaging, whatever. It's great for media.
It's fun when you win.
But it was totally against this whole boring Bombers 1-0 this week, just focused on the task at hand. And I think there's a reverting back to that attitude, back to that focus, right? It's back to, this is business. We've lost twice in a row now. We can't lose a third time, right? We need to come in and we need to be focused. So very much different there. Don't have a vibe on Toronto. They're obviously saying the right things, doing the right things. They're not overly confident. They're not doing any of that. But yeah, I see two teams that are getting ready and focused, and both kind of feel like, both kind of feel that they deserve it. I think Toronto looks at the 2-0 record against the Bombers this year and goes, well, we didn't need a quarterback in either of those games, so who cares if Chad Kelly's out? So
these weren't shootouts.
And there's not even a panic, right? There's not a panic because Chad Kelly's not on the roster anymore. He's not even here this week, right? So there's not, I guess, that distraction, if you will, even from like a team standpoint. But I think the focusing on the Bombers particularly, there is a weird feeling of just razor-focused energy, and I think it's going to bode well for Winnipeg this week.
Let's on either side. I mean, let's start off with the Bombers. And listen, I do think the Bombers are going to win this football game. I think they're ready. I think they're prepared. I think they will execute. I do worry, and part of my optimism for that is the way that the offensive line played. I mean, we talked earlier about Brady Olivera and how determined he was, looking at the messages or the screen cap of, hey, he can't rush for 50 yards against this team. But it was the boys in front of him, the line of scrimmage, that stepped up with one of their best games of the season. And what we know is that if you go up against the Toronto Argonauts and your offensive line isn't up to the challenge, your quarterback is going to be on his ass a lot. And that happened to Zach Collaros 7 times in their last game, 5 times in the game before. They have to do a better job of protecting Zach Collaros. They certainly seem like they're up for the challenge from there. So, I mean, I think I've got optimism going that way. Certainly the way Zach was throwing the football, Kenny Lawler, Brady Olivera, the offense is there. We know what the defense is. My one concern on this, and maybe it's a good thing that they got it out in the last game, much like the Bombers got a lot of those turnovers out earlier in the season and then focused on being that ball control team that doesn't give the football away.
Right.
The special teams was ugly in that game against Saskatchewan. They were very fortunate. They were so much better on the other two aspects of the game, offense and defense. Because if you have those sorts of mistakes, and to be honest, we can sort of look at the first game against the Argos. The pick 6 on a controversial PI or not, Sergio Castillo having a really rough game.
Yep.
That's before we even get to Janarian Grant. Like, to me, the special teams is such a big part of games, especially ones that might be a little lower scoring and could be close, that it was concerning to see what the Bombers did last week, but maybe that's you make the one mistake, but you don't make it again. Thoughts on the Bombers' path to victory and what they need to be better against Toronto if they want to get the job done?
I think it's easy to look at the 2 games against Toronto this year and try to create an edge for the Argonauts, and I think that's fair, right? I mean, one of those games in particular, and the most recent one, was a massive game for the Bombers. They needed that game. Toronto didn't.
It was clinching night.
It was a clinching night, and so the fact that they weren't able to get it done, that was concerning. It just so happens after those Toronto games, Huss, those are 2 pivotal moments of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers season. I was in that locker room in Toronto when they lost that first game. What was it? 5 turnovers in that game? 9 between the two. I think it was 5 turnovers in that game.
That was the game that got them to 2-6.
That got them to 2-6. When I went into the locker room, you know what I saw? I saw a team that was hanging by a thread. I saw a team that wanted to say things to me. I saw Brady Olivera in the corner of the locker room getting emotional and wanting to say something. I saw Nick Dembski in his locker room, kind of head in his hands, frustrated with his game. And when you looked at that situation at 2-6, and then you looked at the daunting task ahead of them on a short week against what was at that time a high-flying BC Lions team, you looked and went, another loss to 2-7, and this team is cooked. Like, I think they're done. Something happened after that moment. It was a reset. It was a talking about how they were beating themselves, how they were getting to close games, and they needed to kind of stick together, right? And so that propelled them to an 8-game win streak. And then who's up at the door? The Toronto Argonauts show up for that pivotal Week 19 game, and the Bombers lose again. What happens? Zach Collaros doesn't address the team very often. He's a guy who's very personal with a lot of players. He just isn't a guy who stands up in the middle of the locker room and does this rah-rah speech. But he does talk when he's frustrated after games. And he's done it a couple times in his time here in Winnipeg, and he did it after the Week 19 loss. And when Zach Collaros stands up and addresses the team, in the passion and in the words and the ways that he gets across his message, everybody listens and everybody takes it to heart. And what the players told me was that they felt that they could play another game after that. Now, Did they lay an egg the next week kind of against Montreal? It didn't quite translate to that.
Was he hyping up Mother Nature?
Yeah, I think he was bringing in the football gods, but I think you see some of that focus in the West Final, and I think that's one of the biggest things is that you're seeing some of the things that we're getting there, the improved play of the O-line. Guys like Kenny Lawler stepping up and having big games, right? He was big down the stretch after playing some pretty mediocre football to his standards after returning from that broken arm. So you see all these kind of things come into or play out the way they did against the Riders, and it's Zach Collaros throwing for a ton of yards and a ton of touchdowns. You got Brady Olivera running for 120 rushing yards. You have the defense stepping up in ways that we didn't even see them step up this season. And what I mean by that is Jordan Younger's defense, its trademark is to rush 3, drop 8. He was dropping as many as 9 players. And you look at that secondary on the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, like we already knew that they're the best group in the CFL. They're now up there, man, with arguably, I think you can start talking secondaries in history. When your veteran safety, who has been a perennial all-star in his career, Brandon Alexander, is the notable kind of, I don't want to say weak link because he's not weak, but he's kind of the guy who's surrounded by young, incredible talent. It really is an incredible defense. Red Hawk Ramsey, probably one of the most underrated guys out
Cramdy's
there right now.
Such a dog.
And Tony Jones. I'm telling you right now, if Adam Bighill had a miracle recovery in time like he did last year's Grey Cup, I don't think he gets in this year because of Tony Jones and what he's been able to do at that middle linebacker position. And this is a guy who got cut out of training camp in Edmonton after Chris Jones essentially promised him a role and a sizable role with the team that year. And they, no offense to Tony, but kind of took him off the trash heap. Like he was down and out, took him in, and now look what's happening here. So you look at all the adversity that this team has faced this season, and while we like to talk about different teams, different years, this is a significantly different team and different year from this what we'll call dynasty era potentially, right? So that's what I think is so dangerous about this club is that they tasted that adversity throughout the season. So this game I think means even more. And I know Mike O'Shea doesn't like to talk about this one meaning more than this one. Well, I feel pretty comfortable and confident saying that the Bombers are going to make this game personal.
I completely agree with what you're saying, and I think they're owning it right now. And I think we're seeing the way that the team is kind of conducting themselves, going about their business, adding a curfew in for the first time. It seems like everyone is here with one purpose and one purpose only. That is to get the Grey Cup and establish this team as a dynasty and not allow for people to look back and say, well, were they really good? They're that team that lost 3 Grey Cups in a row, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
As favorites in every one.
Yeah. In the worst possible fashion, in the first 2 at least.
As far as the Argos, before we go, they do have Nick Arbuckle and not Chad Kelly. It's a big hit to them in their offense. Got some Bomber fans over here getting fired up. I do wonder how much they can rely on that defensive line, which has done a great job against the Bombers in these 2 games, and special teams, because, even when Chad Kelly was in, the Bomber defense was full marks against Toronto. It was just the other side of the football that wasn't quite at the level that you normally need. What does Toronto have to do to make this a game and give themselves a chance to win with Nick Arbuckle being the quarterback?
Look, I think Ryan Dinwiddie is if not the smartest, among the smartest coaches in the entire CFL. He's just, he's a guy that just sees it. He sees the game, the way he breaks down the game, the way he can plan, the way he can, game plan for various teams and schemes. I think it's honestly, I don't want to say second to none because you got some pretty good coordinators on Winnipeg too and other teams, but he is, he's a guy that really sees the game well, and I think that's kind of the X factor here, right? He's been dealt a hand. It didn't happen midweek, right? So he's got the whole week to plan. Nick Arbuckle is a great story in the sense that he's got a massive opportunity right now to resurrect his career. A career that I think a lot of people heading into this season thought was over. He didn't get picked up in February or March or April. the Argos picked him up in May when they got the news that Chad Kelly would be gone for at least 9 games. And the feeling you know I've been hearing about it was they kind of had to. They had no other options. And the things that coach liked the most, among the things they like the most about their players is the ability to trust. So Dinwiddie was the offensive coordinator in Calgary when Nick Arbuckle was making a name for himself and was seen and viewed as like the next quarterback. Well, that didn't work. And it didn't work because Nick Arbuckle, kind of a weird dude. Like he doesn't like, I don't know how to explain this without being kind of like jerky about it, but I don't want to be. But when you talk to other players, you talk to people who know him, he's just a guy that like is just a bit of an odd duck, and he doesn't
wired a little differently.
And he doesn't like guys kind of go like that's our quarterback kind of thing. And so, I hate to throw shade at him here, but I do think that I think it's one of those things where Ryan Dinwiddie creates a plan and says, "Don't screw this up for us, kid. Like don't try anything special." Like I don't think Ryan Dinwiddie's going into this game, like the Ottawa Red Blacks went into the East Final with Drew Brown and said, "You got to win us this game." Yeah. I think they're going to limit his risky plays, but I think they're going to limit him throughout. They're going to lean on guys like Kadeem Carey, who he's resurrected his career in Toronto. He's a deadly weapon, and they do have some quality. They have some quality receivers. Mackay Polk, DeMonte Coxey, like those guys are good players. They'll get open. So he has the pieces around him. He has a good O-line. And Nick Arbuckle has a good history against the Bombers, right? He only completed, I think, 82 yards. 82 yards in that win in Week 8 when they, won, I think, 14-11 it was. But he was the quarterback. Now, this is a few years ago, so a lot can change that. But he was the quarterback in 2021 where the Bombers were steamrolling teams, and the only meaningful game they lost in their 4-2 finish was to Nick Arbuckle and the Toronto Argonauts in his first stint with Toronto. So it's it is a messy. I think the Bombers are clear favorites. I don't think that's I think they would have been favorites even if Chad Kelly played, but there is just something, this great equalizer of just the weirdness of these two teams playing, the strength of Toronto's defense, and just who knows, man, the football gods worked for the Bombers in that regular season finale, but they have not been on Winnipeg's side in the 2 games against Toronto this year.
And some would say at times in these last couple Grey Cups as well. The game is on Sunday. Winnipeg Free Press and winnipegfreepress.com for all of Jeff's work. We'll have another live episode of Winnipeg Sports Talk on Friday from the program. We'll have some content on the channel on Saturday as well. So stay locked to everything that we've got going for the week coming up heading into the big game. And then we'll finish it off with the show, and I'm sure Jeff will join us on Monday here from Vancouver one more time before we head back on Monday night. Cannot wait. Well, listen, I actually can wait for the game because Grey Cup week is so fun. I don't want it to be over yet, but
I have a massive deadline tomorrow, so I can wait. Just time should go slow.
Good stuff. Well, keep your eyes on the Freep and Hammer. Great stuff. We should do something next week to wrap the entire season, but Absolutely. What a great year it's been doing this, our first inaugural season of CFL 110. Again, huge thanks to our great friend Pat Kanuga, Garage Living Winnipeg, 204-999-1234. Give Pat a call. He'll let you know, maybe come out and check out your garage and how they can completely revolutionize it. Check them out on their website, garageliving.com, for the examples of all the great work that they've done. In the meantime, have a great evening. Enjoy Grey Cup weekend and enjoy the big game on Sunday. For Jeff Hamilton, producer/announcer Michael Remus, I'm Andrew Paterson. Enjoy the game, and thanks for being with us on CFL 110.
You've been listening to CFL 110, presented by Garage Living Winnipeg, hosted by Andrew Hustler Paterson and Jeff Hamilton.
Great announcing.